Hello and welcome to this year's IPT online lecture series on caring conversations for peace and justice. It is our great pleasure and privilege that you are joining us for another year and another series. And this year we will dive deeper into questions around how to navigate complexity in the fields of peace building and conflict transformation. My name is Julia Scharinger. I'm the program manager of the International Civilian Peacebuilding Training Program here at the ASPR, and I will have the pleasure and privilege of accompanying you throughout this series. While peace building in research and in practice has already engaged with questions of complexity, for example, around engaging with complex conflict constellation for quite some time, I think COVID and its impact on the economy, on how we structure or work around education, on violence against women, on the environment, etc., has really shown how interdependent we are as a world community, as human beings, but also how different crises affect us differently. It also has shown that we really live in a time of what Edgar Morin would call polycrisis. And I'm calling on Edgar Morin here because at the ASPR within the last year, we really dove deeper into Morin's work on Terre Patrie, on Homeland Earth, in supporting us to think through how we can navigate the different polycrises we face, how we can engage with complexity while still being close to a sense of agency and of purpose, but also to reimagine identity and belonging. So not only to think about the nation state as our home or the community as our home, but really think about a planetary sense of home and of belonging, as it shows in the title of Homeland Earth. This actually is also a campaign that we are running throughout this year with many partners all across the world already. You're very much invited to join us, and as you may already guess, this lecture series is part of this campaign as well. So coming to today's topic, it's the first lecture series, and what better way to start off than thinking about the very deep structures or deep cultures of our assumptions, of what we have learned, of how we move in the world with maybe not even noticing. We are going to talk about worldviews, and we're going to talk or explore worldviews as entry point for personal, cultural and systems transformation. I'm really happy and excited for this lecture, and I'm even more excited that Dr. Annick de Witt will join us for it. She has done such significant work both in research and in practice in setting up her own organization in this field, and I'm really looking forward to learning more from her work and also exploring the significance or the learnings of her work in thinking it through for peace building and conflict transformation. And before I hand over to Annick, I want to say this. Talking about multiple crises, about identity, about belonging, about worldviews, is in fact a complex task, especially as we also have the luxury of coming together here in a very diverse group. We have people from all over the world, from different professional backgrounds, different cultural or spiritual paths, etc. So I really want to invite you to bring care, kindness, generosity and curiosity, as much as rigor and reflexivity into these conversations, so that we together in this 1 hour can reimagine and also experience and produce a sense of belonging that travels across a certain community or a certain designated space, so that we can practice inclusion, inclusivity, listening and caring for and with each other. And with that, thank you again for joining us, everybody. I hope you'll have a meaningful and inspiring conversation. Annick, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Julia, for this wonderful introduction and this really broad framing of the topic today also. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for being interested in these topics and this work and sharing this time together. My name is Annick de Witt. I am the founder and initiator of an organization called Worldview Journeys. And today I will talk about exploring worldviews, or really the potential of exploring worldviews as entry points, as starting points for a process of, or processes of, personal, cultural, and systems transformation. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself, just to give you a little bit of understanding of where I'm coming from and where all these bigger ideas that we're going to talk about are coming from. So I have been working and studying in the field of environmental issues for a long time. And it was actually back in college when I was reading environmental philosophers that I really came to the realization that at the heart of these massive ecological issues, global ecological issues, are our worldviews, are the ways we relate to ourselves, to each other, to nature and the larger whole, to our world. This is at the foundation, this is at the root, these environmental philosophers would say, of these big issues. And so at some point I decided to pursue PhD, and after that a postdoc, in which I really focused on exploring worldviews and how they relate to issues of sustainability at large and the transformation towards more sustainable societies. This is a long story. I won't go too much into that, but what it did do is that it ended up leading to a new worldview model and a worldview test. And I think at least some of you have taken this test for today's lecture. So we came to a piece of research where we could distinguish between these major worldviews in the West, particularly the Netherlands and the USA, as you can see here, and found also significant correlations to environmental issues, to environmental behaviors, to concerns about climate change, to political preferences. So something really interesting started to emerge here. And let me see. At some point, this was, when we developed the research, we were talking about a research scale, but we realized this was really suitable for putting it online and having people have their own experience. And so we created the online worldview test, as you can see here. I put it on my personal website, and it started to travel a little bit, to my surprise. And I started to get emails from people in organizations that were working with it, from coaches, but also, and in particular, actually from teachers, both in high school settings or secondary school settings, as well as university or higher education settings. And teachers from, also many different fields just told me, hey, I'm asking my students to take this test, and we're having interesting classroom discussions. And at this time, myself having been in academia for about 8 years, I had the kind of the itch. I wanted to put my ideas into practice. I wanted to see, how can we use these insights? How can we use this knowledge, these ideas, for kind of transformation on the ground? And so through these teachers emailing me, I became aware this could be a tool for education and transformation. And so this was how the idea for this new organization that we call Worldview Journeys started to emerge. And we're still in this process. We are still in the process of establishing ourselves as an organization, and we're experimenting and working with different groups. But our aim is to offer learning tools and leadership programs that bring and support people to gain awareness around our individual and our collective worldviews. And so we specifically design these programs to support reflection, interaction, and transformation. We kind of serving these larger aims of an expansion of mindsets, maybe kind of cultivating also that like planetary and a more planetary perspective that somebody like Moran is talking about. A regeneration of cultures, like an enhancement of social relationship, and a transformation or a repurposing of our systems. Our tools and programs are science-based, and they can be used online and offsite and by individuals as well as with groups. And I like to say up front, these are big ideas. They may sound even pretentious to you. Um, and we haven't figured it out yet. We are still in this process. So I'm sharing with you, you could say, our journey of discovery. We're learning while we're going. We feel these ideas are powerful and worthwhile and actually important to explore, especially at this time, as Julia was also talking about, this time on planet Earth, where we're dealing with indeed a poly crisis, so many issues, such big questions that go to the heart of our existence. We're dealing with existential challenges. So we feel it's worthwhile to explore these ideas and to experiment with how we can use them, as I said, as entry points for personal, cultural, and systems transformation. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the foundational ideas behind this, starting with like, what are worldviews? Why are they so significant? How can we study them? I'll discuss some possible objections, and then I want to dive in and have a deeper conversation with all of you. So starting with the basics, what are worldviews? So we like to say worldviews are the big stories to which humans make sense of their experience and their world. And these big stories give us answers, give us a set of more or less coherent answers to existential questions that humans have been pondering for God knows how long, really. It's this really foundational questions. Questions like, what is real? How did this universe come to be as it is? What is the nature of reality? In philosophy, they call this questions of ontology or ontological questions. Also questions like, how do we gain valid knowledge? How do we know that what we believe is actually true? Who or what are we to trust? Questions of epistemology. Also questions about who are we? What kind of creatures are we? What's our nature? What's the nature of humanity? Questions of anthropology, you could say. And questions about a good life. What is a good life? How should we live? What is a good life in an ethical, a moral sense? How can I be a good moral human being, as well as in an aesthetic or qualitative sense? How can I live a life that is fulfilling and worthwhile? Questions of axiology. And then there's questions of social imaginary or our societal vision. How should we live with one another? How should we organize our society? What's the relationship between individual and community? So the way a worldview answers each of these questions is related to how it answers all of them. So this means that worldviews are they're frameworks, they're systems of meaning making. There's a kind of coherence there. And through these big stories, a worldview provides us with answers to these fundamental questions, thus giving us a sense of life being meaningful, manageable, and stable. And so, sorry, my phone starts ringing. Modern times, giving us a sense of life being meaningful, manageable, and stable. So fulfilling these really deep, profound human, like universal human needs. Worldviews also tell us what is true and what is valid, thereby giving us a sense of orientation and direction. And they reveal what parts of the world we see, as well as where its boundaries are. So they function as boundaries and filters. Now you may think, ah, this is all very philosophical. I don't actually think so much about this stuff, so I don't have a worldview. But that's actually not true. The truth is that everyone has a worldview. Our worldview are just so basic to our thinking that they're often invisible to us, like water is to fish. So we don't often think much about our worldviews themselves, nor do we think much about where they come from. But it's a really good question to ask. So where do our worldviews come from? So our worldviews are profoundly shaped by the experiences of our life. Particularly our childhood experiences are really influential. Children are like sponges. We're so full into learning. We're so open. A lot of ideas about reality are actually spoon fed to us, not necessarily our parents telling us what to believe or what to think, although that also happens, of course, but just absorbing how they relate to reality, how they relate to the world, how they relate to themselves, to other people, and to us. This has an input. This is a process of the deep process of socialization, the impacts of which are hard to overestimate. But also, of course, schooling and education, peers and role models, culture and media really inform the development of our worldviews. And then how can you study these worldviews and what kind of fields, academic fields have been looking at worldviews? So just really roughly, you could say that the field of particularly developmental psychology studies the development of the human mind and the structures, the changes in the human mind throughout the lifespan. So it's on the individual level over time. And then fields like sociology and philosophy more look at how whole societies understood and related to the world over history, so through different eras or epochs of time. So getting a kind of a broader, a longer term perspective. And then you have a field like anthropology that really focuses on meaning making by different groups or cultures and the differences therein. So why are these worldviews so significant, we think? So we like to say that worldviews have world-shaping powers. And this is so in both more obvious ways as well as more subtle, almost invisible ways. So more obvious ways is like our values, our understanding of reality will, shape what kind of career we pursue, what kind of person we marry, what kind of communities want to live in, what kind of activities we engage in. This is obvious for most people. But then there are these ways that worldviews are shaping our world in ways that we're often not aware of. You could say that through perceiving the world in a certain way, we actually call that world into being. It's a bit like a self-fulfilling prophecy. One very simple example is the placebo effect. People benefit from having a sugar pill just because they believe this sugar pill is going to make them better. And so this tells us something about the power of our beliefs and our expectations on our own, the way it impacts our own actually health and well-being. And we also know that for the brain, it doesn't really matter that much whether something is actually happening or whether we're just imagining it to happen. The same areas of the brain will light up. And so we know that the beliefs, the expectations, the ideas, the kind of attitude we live from is informing our own functioning and well-being. But it goes further than that. Research is also showing that the expectations we hold of others are informing their performance and well-being. So there was this really simple little study a while back with rats that were handled by lab personnel who were holding different beliefs about these rats. So they were all the same rats, but there were different groups of lab personnel. One group believing these were very smart rats, and one group believing these were very dumb rats. Then these rats were made to do tests, and it appeared, or it came out that the rats who were handled by people believing they were very smart, scored almost twice as good on all kinds of performance tests. So that's kind of a powerful result, I would say. And the researchers suggested, like, how does this work? The research is saying, well, the lab personal's beliefs were translating in all kinds of subtle behavioral changes that were impacting the rat, like handling the rat with more sensitivity and care. So this tells us something about how our beliefs, how our views, our expectations also of others are shaping their performance, their well-being, and in that way are like co-shaping our world. And so we can see that we are co-creating, if you will, our world to a much greater degree than we're often aware of. And yeah, so our mindsets co-shape our world. That's kind of the simple conclusion. So what does the field of developmental psychology tells us about how these mindsets can develop over time? And so one of the first thing that they concluded, and this is on the base of more than a century of studies into this field, is that the human mind can continue to transform throughout the lifespan. We're not done at adulthood. We can continue to learn, grow, and evolve. And the field also shows that our constructions of the world or our worldviews can become more expansive and complex. So having a wider perspective, being able to hold more complexity, as well as less distorted, reactive, and egocentric. Egocentric. So basically becoming more objective or more neutral, less distorted, less reactive, as well as less just purely self-centered. Perhaps being able to see from more angles, more different viewpoints. So this is actually a very hope-giving conclusion, I would say. We can continue to grow, and this is the direction we're growing into. We're becoming more expansive. We're becoming more complex. We're becoming more objective or neutral, less self-centered. And so that's why, or that's kind of one conceptual foundation or empirical foundation, actually, you could say, that we build on when we say exploring worldviews can be an entry point for personal growth and transformation. Because when we start to explore worldviews, we actually, instead of just being locked up only in our own perspective, completely being identified with our own worldview, we start to look at it from other perspectives. We, as we like to say, take perspective on our perspective. We're not just in it, we learn to look at it. And with that, we broaden our horizon, we create room for more viewpoints, more perspectives, which results in an expansion of mindsets with more possibilities for thought, choice, and action. And so this may sound all beautiful, but a little abstract to you, or I can imagine it does. And so we have been experimenting with these ideas. We've been working in a project at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, where we have been doing what we call a little, these were all online. This was also largely taking place throughout the pandemic, an online educational worldview journey. And so these were sessions where students took the worldview test, learned about what worldviews are, why they're so significant, but also where they started deeper dialogues with their fellow students, where they started exploring their own worldview, like where it came from and what worldviews they identified with, and having deeper conversations, doing some journaling work, and just kind of getting this perspective of understanding their own worldview as part of of a larger whole, of other options for worldviews. And what we learned is that, and these were sessions of like half a day or so with some homework, and the feedback we got, we quite thoroughly evaluated this program. And the feedback we got from students was that they really felt, well, for one, that this was something entirely different, that in their whole university education, they'd never quite looked at something like this. And so there was a sense of like, oh, this is refreshing, this is different, it's nice to be doing this. Students found it interesting, but they also reported things like, oh yeah, I'm more aware now that other people see differently, and I'm more aware of the kind of perspective I'm coming from. So, as I said, we're still in the experimental phase with all of this, but I feel the first results show us that there really is this potential for using worldviews as an entry point for personal growth and transformation. And, it can help us to appreciate ourselves, to be part of a bigger, more complex world, to start questioning our ingrained assumptions, some of these ideas that we perhaps grown up with, that were spoon fed to us. We can become somewhat more self-authoring, more in charge of the narratives, the ideas, the stories that we tell ourselves and that run our lives, often unconsciously. And in this way, we can come to expand our mindsets over time, cultivate ways of understanding our life and the world at large in ways that are more expansive, complex, and compassionate. So that's more like the personal angle. And then we say, well, exploring worldviews also has a really big potential as an entry point or a starting point for cultural change and transformation, for enhancing social relationships. And one of the concrete ways that we do this, we've been doing all kinds of works in groups, or all kind of processes and practices in groups. One of the things we're doing and that everyone is invited to is a regular Worldview cafe, which is an online space where we meet with people from different places, just people that want to come and explore their views and values. And what we find is that when in through guided exchanges, so we do create structures for people to have a space to start exploring their views and their value in a space where we're really listening to each other and where we really get our time to formulate our thoughts while the other person is really listening to us. We're finding that people have wonderful conversations in the first place, which is powerful in itself, and that they find common ground. That people who are like, we're going a little bit deeper, we're not talking about the usual stuff, and we're learning that however different we are, we find that there's a lot of commonality. There's something also in this setting of where we are talking with people about the deeper dimensions of our lives, where something opens up that allows for common ground to emerge. So we believe, again, that this is a foundation, an entry point for regenerating cultures, supporting constructive communication and creative collaboration. So that's the second. Oh yeah, here I have a couple more things. Yeah, so one thing is that it can help us overcome confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is this tendency to believe the things that kind of fit, that align with our pre-existing ideas. And we all have this. This is very natural and standard. But just talking with people who think differently helps us eases that effect a little bit. We gain understanding of others' thinking. We discover common ground, shared values, and we start to understand our worldview in this context of a larger system of worldviews. We start to see, oh yeah, there's, we fit in this larger whole, you could say. So that's from the social or the cultural aspect. And then we believe that worldviews can be an entry point, a starting point for more systemic change and transformation. And I put this picture here of the iceberg model, and I think many of you probably know it. It's a very well-known thought. It actually originates with Donella Meadows, who articulated this idea of the deepest leverage points. The idea that if we want to intervene in a system, if we want to change a system, we can work on the surface, what is the events of what is happening, but our effects will be limited. We can go deeper and actually start to see the deeper patterns of behavior, or even the system structures that lie underneath that. But the most leveraged, the most powerful effect we get is when we actually get to the heart of the system. And she talks about the mental models, or the values, the assumptions, the belief systems, the paradigms and purposes that systems revolve around. Because that's another idea within systems thinking, is that systems always revolve and evolve and are structured around their core purpose. What are they here to do? And so exploring our worldviews allows us to get to the heart of the system. Here I say it like this, like kind of excavate, address the intent of the systems we're trying to change, rather than working on the surface. And so by supporting people to explore, question, and renew these purposes and paradigms at the heart of the systems or the issues we're dealing with, systemic change is enabled. Through a clarification of values and a renewed sense of purpose, great motivation is mobilized and systems can be realigned. And so again, this can then support this larger system transformation. This one is still, these again, I think they're powerful ideas. Also in this, in the world of systems change and all kinds of communities and groups that are working on change for a better world, to put it in really broad terms. There's a dominant idea that we need to address our mindsets, but we have limited tools to actually do so. And so we're still in the process of exploring how this actually works, but we believe these worldviews can be a powerful entry point. That if we can start to look more from this perspective, we can make perhaps slower changes, but maybe deeper changes that are really starting to shift systems themselves. And we also know that, if we want to address complex issues, which of course is what we're talking about, as Julia also framed up beautifully in the beginning, we need all the perspectives in the room. We need to look at the issues from multiple angles. So we need actually all the different worldviews on the table. And in this way, we can also design more integrated solutions that also can then in their turn engage and mobilize the different perspectives, the different worldviews in society better. So that's a whole download of ideas, and I imagine you may also have some thoughts, some objections, or some concerns perhaps. So I'll very shortly address 3 of them that I hear often, that people often ask me about. And so the first one is the developmental perspective. So we are talking about worldviews in a kind of developmental fashion. And this can generate resistance or misunderstanding, particularly based on this idea that, if there's development of worldview, then there's some kind of hierarchy and certain worldviews are better than other ones. And this, of course, can be troubling to people. And I understand. I do think that we need to look at, if any form of any skill or competence that we acquire, whether we learn to play the violin or ride a bike or master math, we move through, and this is also what the empirical literature says, we move through learning sequences. There is a way that our skill or and the same counts for our understanding of the world or our ethical reason, in which that changes qualitatively over time with later stages building forth on earlier stages, kind of arising out of earlier stages. And I think for most of us, when we look at our own lives and we look 10 years back and we ask ourselves like, has my thinking evolved? Have I become perhaps more complex or more nuanced in my understanding, or more compassionate towards other viewpoints? over, whatever time period, the past 10 or 20 years, or since I reached adulthood, or most of us would probably say, yes, I did. And, and we would find that comforting and a wonderful thing. And so this is kind of the basis. A developmental perspective also gives us something to aspire to. We have a direction that we grow in. And then it is just really important that when we're talking about worldviews in this way, that we frame them really well. In the first place, with the worldview test, it's simplistic. It doesn't tell you with any definity or with any definitiveness what your worldview is. It's just a simple test. It gives you a first flavor. Now the exploration can start. That's the idea. And then when we're talking about worldviews, it's important to understand every worldview emerges as a response to the conditions of its time, developing solutions to overcome the problems and the challenges of the time, as well as often actually generating its own new problems. And so each of these worldviews bring certain innovations, certain qualities, certain contributions, as well as certain new problems. Habermas calls this the dialectics of progress, creating new wonderful aspects and as well as new problems. And so this counts for every worldview. So it's very important to realize that none of these worldviews is intrinsically better. They have different qualities to offer to the larger whole, as well as different challenges. And it also depends a lot on how we express these worldviews. These are just really large, broad structures of thinking. We can express them in so many ways. We can express them in more noble and less noble ways. And so, yeah, I think that kind of framing of worldviews is very important to start out with. And then sometimes I'm asked, is like, can this approach increase polarization rather than ease it? Because of course you do get like a distinction or differentiation into different worldviews. And I would say to that question, yeah, I think it can. If we don't, like with any tool, if we don't use it wisely, it can be misused. So therefore it's even more important that we frame it in a certain way, that we invite ourselves and the groups that we're working with, that we invite ourselves into a certain space. Like Julia did so beautifully in the start of this talk, like we're inviting ourselves into a space of kindness, of wanting to understand, of curiosity, and most of all, perhaps of exploration. And then the last point is our aim is not to change people's worldviews. So as an organization, this is not our business. We don't want to change people's worldviews. And we think it's actually very important to start with where people are at is completely good. Everyone is just invited to explore, to become curious, to discover other perspectives. And yeah, our aim is not to change people's worldviews, even though there is a bigger vision where we believe that, in the spirit of also Moran, that addressing the complex planetary issues we're dealing with, we do overall, need more planetary perspectives to deal with that. I'll leave it at this for now. Thank you so much for all your attention. I want to open the floor for questions. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Annick, for this very thought-provoking and inspiring input. I really, really appreciate how you approach worldviews on the one hand, but also then how you think it through on a personal, on a cultural and systemic level. I'm sure there will be many, many more interesting conversations and also a start of them now as the following part of this lecture. Before we start with that, we do have to say goodbye to our viewers via YouTube. So thank you for joining us. But before you head off, I want to share a question for reflection also with you and invite you to think more about it as you close this recording or this part of YouTube. So the question we want to share is, What have you learned about navigating complexity in your efforts to contribute to a more peaceful and just world from Annick's inputs? With that, thank you for joining us. We hope to see you again, and goodbye.